there are moments that operate just beneath the surface of our awareness. Intersections of chance where an ordinary day becomes something else entirely. On its face, this was a tranquil American evening, the kind of profound quiet that settles over a neighborhood when the day is done, and the only sounds are the rhythmic hiss of lawn sprinklers and the distant hum of traffic on a far-off highway. But in that quiet, a collision of two worlds was approaching. A collision of perception and reality, of unchecked authority and unseen consequence. We tell ourselves that our future is a construct of our choices, our ambitions, our character. But what happens when that future, so carefully built, can be irrevocably altered in an instant by someone who knows nothing about us? What happens when your life story, with all its context and nuance, is rewritten by a stranger's snap judgment, made in the disorienting glare of flashing lights?
The man who asked that question, Officer David Miller, believed he already knew the answer. In his 15 years on the force, he had developed a certainty about the world, a lens through which he saw all events. He was certain. But on this evening, his certainty was a fatal flaw. He was profoundly wrong. And that single, flawed assumption was about to trigger a chain of events that would unravel everything he thought he knew about the young man in front of him, and the delicate balance of power he so confidently commanded. The young man at the center of this was Leo Vance, 17 years old. By every measurable standard, he was on a path to success. He wasn't just a student, he was an honor student, the kind whose name was a permanent fixture on the school's academic lists. His passion, however, lived outside the classroom. He wasn't just a hobbyist with a camera. He was a gifted photographer, an observer of the world who found beauty in the overlooked corners of his city. His work, which focused on urban landscapes and candid human moments, showed a maturity and an eye for composition that was far beyond his years. For Leo, his camera wasn't just a device. It was an extension of his own vision, a tool for telling stories without words. His father, Marcus Vance, was a constant, steadying presence in his life, even when his work for the government demanded long hours and frequent travel. To Leo, he was just Dad, a demanding but loving figure who instilled in him a quiet confidence and a profound respect for rules, not just the laws of the land, but the unspoken rules of integrity and self-respect. Marcus had sat Leo down many times over the years, preparing him for a world that might not always see him for who he was. He taught him how to remain calm under pressure, how to speak with clarity and respect to figures of authority, and most importantly, how to understand his rights. It was a curriculum no school could offer, taught by a father who knew its necessity. The evening of the encounter began like any other. A Friday in early autumn. Leo was walking home from a friend's house where they had been working on a school project. Taking a familiar shortcut through the manicured streets of the Northwood suburb, the world was closed off by the music in his headphones, an intricate instrumental track that helped him think. His camera, a professional-grade DSLR that had been a 17th birthday gift from his father, was secure in its padded bag slung over his shoulder. He was in his own world, thinking about a photo he'd taken earlier, completely unaware that another world, with its own rules and its own brutal logic, was about to impose itself upon him. But on this particular evening, a familiar sight on the horizon would change the course of his life. The flashing blue and red lights appeared in his peripheral vision, a sudden jarring intrusion into the evening's calm. The cruiser belonged to Officers Miller and Davis. For Officer Miller, a 15-year veteran of the force, suspicion was more than a tool of the trade. It was an instinct he trusted above all else. His younger partner, Officer Davis, was only a few years on the job and tended to follow his senior partner's lead, observing his methods as a kind of informal training. The official police report would later state that a call had come in about a burglar in the area. The description was vague. a black male in a hoodie. Leo was wearing a dark gray hoodie against the evening chill. For Officer Miller, seeing Leo in that neighborhood, with that description in mind, was not the start of an investigation. It was the end. His mind connected the dots with a speed that left no room for doubt or alternative explanations. This was not a conversation to determine the facts. It was a confrontation to confirm a pre-existing belief. Officer Miller's questions began immediately, a rapid-fire assault designed to systematically dismantle Leo's composure. They weren't designed to gather information. They were verbal traps, designed to create contradictions and build a narrative of guilt. "Why are you in this part of town?" The unstated implication was clear. "You don't belong here." "What's in the bag?" The question was asked with a tone that already assumed the contents were illicit. Every truthful answer Leo provided was filtered through Miller's lens of suspicion. He was coming from a friend's house? A likely story. He was a student? He didn't look like one. And then Miller saw the camera. When Leo opened his bag as instructed, the professional-grade piece of equipment sat nestled in its foam padding. To a photographer, it was a tool of art. To Officer Miller, it was the missing piece of the puzzle. In his mind, there was no plausible scenario where a teenager like Leo could have afforded such an item legally. It had to be stolen. The camera, the very symbol of Leo's passion and his future ambitions, was instantly reframed as the primary evidence of his crime. Leo, remembering his father's countless lessons, focused on his breathing and tried to navigate the escalating situation with respect. He explained calmly that the camera was a birthday gift. This simple, honest explanation was met with a dismissive scoff from Officer Miller. The disbelief on the officer's face was absolute. He ordered Leo to place his hands on the hood of the vehicle. What followed was not a simple pat-down, but a thorough search of his bag, a search for which there was no legal consent, no warrant, and no probable cause beyond the officer's own unfounded theory. It was an intrusion, a violation of his personal space that felt designed to humiliate. The search yielded nothing. No stolen property, no weapons, no contraband. Just a camera, a phone, a wallet with his school ID, and a few textbooks. The evidence of his guilt that Miller was so certain he would find simply wasn't there. Faced with a complete lack of evidence, a different officer might have concluded they had made a mistake. But Miller doubled down. The absence of proof only deepened his conviction. He decided to take Leo to the station for further questioning, a vague term that hung in the air with menace. To Officer Miller, Leo's request to make a phone call was a familiar tactic. He saw it as the last-ditch effort of a cornered suspect trying to invoke a higher authority, a desperate bluff. He found it amusing. And so, in a moment of supreme overconfidence, a moment he would come to regret for the rest of his life, he agreed with a smirk. He handed Leo his own phone, watching with a cynical satisfaction. Leo's hands were trembling as he dialed the number he knew by heart. The phone rang once, twice. Then, a calm, deep, and serious voice answered with a single word. Vance. Leo's words tumbled out in a rush, a torrent of fear and confusion. The voice on the other end listened patiently, his silence a grounding force. He asked for one thing, the street intersection, and then gave a simple, clear command that cut through the chaos. "Don't say another word. I'm on my way." Less than 10 minutes later, a vehicle appeared. It was a black sedan, unremarkable at first glance, but it moved with an unnerving purpose. It didn't speed or screech to a halt. It simply arrived, its movements economical and precise, parking behind the police cruiser. Its headlights, bright and white, cut through the flashing emergency lights with surgical precision, momentarily washing out the chaotic scene in a clean, authoritative glare. The man who stepped out was Marcus Vance. He was not in a uniform. He was wearing an impeccably tailored dark suit that seemed more like armor than clothing. His face was a mask of controlled calm, his expression unreadable. He did not look at Officer Miller. He did not scan the scene. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, were locked on his son. Every step he took on the pavement was measured and deliberate, the walk of a man who was completely in command of himself and the space around him. The very atmosphere on the street began to shift. The air grew still, heavy with a new kind of tension. Miller, irritated by this unexpected and commanding interruption, finally broke his stare from the newcomer and moved to intercept him. His authority had been challenged, and he moved to reassert it. But there was no argument. There was no negotiation. When Marcus Vance presented his credentials, the entire dynamic of the encounter was fundamentally and permanently inverted. The officers immediately released Leo. Marcus calmly took his son, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder, and left. But not before informing the two stunned officers that their supervisor would be contacted first thing in the morning, an action that would be followed by a formal complaint to the highest levels, the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. The fallout was as swift and severe as the arrival of the black sedan. An official internal affairs investigation was launched, and it confirmed that Officer Miller had a documented history of similar complaints, a pattern of behavior that had been ignored for too long. He was fired from the force. His partner, Officer Davis, was placed on probation and assigned to mandatory and intensive retraining in de-escalation tactics and constitutional rights, a stark lesson in the consequences of silent complicity. Leo Vance was safe. He was safe because his father held a position of power, a power that could hold others accountable. But his story raises a deeply disturbing question. What happens to the thousands of others on countless other nights who don't have an FBI agent to call? This incident was never truly about a stolen camera. It was about the destructive power of prejudice, the casual abuse of authority, and the terrifying speed at which a person's future can be put on trial by the side of a road. Situations like this happen every day, often in the shadows, far from any camera that could document them. It forces us to ask, what do you think is the most effective way to ensure accountability in law enforcement? Share your constructive ideas and experiences in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more true stories that explore the world beneath the surface.